Hey everyone, welcome back to my shop. I had a request come in for what they called a TV stand, but not for a TV. And so what that ended up being was I'd call it a display cabinet with some sliding glass front doors. And so we had a lot of fun with this one. I've never installed hardware onto sliding glass, and that was definitely the most stressful part of my year. And so if you've never done that, you ought to try that. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and build this TV stand, but not for a TV. And stick around, we'll get started.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and use some red oak for this project. This will match some of the other wood furniture that my customers have in their home. And while I go ahead and mill this up, they contacted me in about July to build this and was hoping that I could have it done for the Christmas season. And at the time I wasn't sure I'd be able to do that, but I was happy when I was actually able to move some stuff around, and I got this done just before Thanksgiving, which allowed them to use it and put their Christmas villages and stuff in and display those through the Christmas season. So that was pretty awesome. Really awesome customers to work with, and was just a joy. So here what I'm doing is just measuring the different widths of the board so that I can run those through the table saw. I'm going to cut those just as wide as I can as we're preparing to glue up some panels with those. And so I just cut it to the thinnest part of the board.
Okay, so we're at the point where I've got these boards mostly milled up. We've determined how we want our grain and stuff to line up, and so I've gone ahead and just marked that as you've seen me done here. And then I've got these two marks here, and what that indicates, that's a joint that I want to run through the joiner again. These edges here, they've both been through the joiner. They're pretty clean, they line up really well, and so we're going to leave those alone. And we're going to go ahead and just run these through at two edges. Neither of those have been through the joiner yet. They've gone through the table saw. The joint looks pretty good, but I think I can tighten that up just a little bit more running those through the joiner, just a light pass to clean that edge up. And that's what I use these marks here for, is just to indicate that that's what I need to run through the joiner. And so with this set of boards, we actually have plenty of width. We're just over 23 inches, and I need about 21.5. And so the reason I do that here is if I need to kind of limit what I take off to give me as much as I want to have, I know that I don't need to do anything with this joint. I just need to clean up this joint. With this set of boards that will become the bottom, we have a couple of issues here that we're gonna take care of. This joint here, same thing. Those have both been run through the joiner, so they're nice and clean. They line up really well. I'm happy with that. This joint, this side has been through the joiner, but this side was only through the table saw. And so I'm going to go ahead and clean this joint up through the table saw, or through the joiner, excuse me. We're going to clean that up through the joiner. And the reason I'm being real careful with this one is because I don't have much. I need 21.5. I'm just over 21 5/8. So I can clean that up through the joiner and then still be plenty over 21.5 so that I can glue that up and then trim it down to size after the glue up. The other issue that we have is this one board. It's going to bow a little bit on us, and so we're also going to go ahead and use some biscuits on this joint, and I'll probably do this joint too with these long ones as well. We'll just use some biscuits to help with alignment. That will aid in the glue up and make it so that we can get that nice and flat without having to do too much sanding afterwards. Because these don't fit through my planer or anything, I have planed them down to the finished width of 3/4 of an inch. And so whatever we have after glue up, we're going to have to sand that out.
These finishing passes through the joiner, I usually set that to 1/32 of an inch. I find that's just enough to clean up the saw marks and give you a nice joint. When I do these glue ups, biscuit joiner is an excellent option for helping to line those boards up. A lot of people use dominoes in this instant, but I don't own a domino joiner, And this has been a pretty good way for me. It's much less expensive as far as the biscuits and the tool. So if you've been thinking about whether or not you could use something like that in your woodworking, it's a really good option for this kind of use. We'll go ahead and just let that dry for a little while. If you've watched many of my videos, you'll notice that I will often use plywood frames in my building process. And I like these because they add a lot of strength without a ton of weight. The plywood is nice and stable, and so you don't get any wood movement that way. And I usually use them in places where you'll never see them in the finished project. And here you can see me cutting a groove to assemble these joints. We use a tongue and groove joint, and I like to run those through and then I'll flip them around, just center that joint, and we'll go ahead and cut the tongues. If you've seen me do many of these, you know that I like the tenoning jig as well. It's a good option for cutting these tenons, and also another one of those things that is relatively inexpensive and really makes the process a little easier. And I'll brad nail those, and then I can free up those clamps. Here I'm building a frame for the back of the case, and this I'm using poplar, and the reason for that is this will be seen outside the case. Of course, it'll be the back of the case and up against the wall most of the time, but I just wanted to make this out of poplar. And I'm using a mortise and tenon joint for this frame because I didn't want those grooves to show on the back of the case. Now we'll take those panels and those frames and we'll just square those up and cut them to size.
Okay, so an update on where we're at with our build here. We've got our case dry fit together for the first time. And so what we needed to know now is we want our dimensions for our back plywood panel that's going to go in. We're going to actually cut a groove into the bottom oak shelf, and then this top frame, and then both sides will also get a groove, and that plywood panel will fit into that groove there. And so we've got those dimensions. We also needed the dimensions for our back frame that will go on there kind of like that. And that's going to be cut to fit between this bottom frame and the top frame. And then also we're going to run a dado to fit the shelf into. Once we do that, that's going to give that shelf plenty of support. And once you put the face frame on, we shouldn't have any support issues. That'll keep that shelf nice and flat for as long as this case is around. So we've got those dimensions. We've got everything we need there. We do still have our sides and our width and everything still has not been trimmed off. We'll cut everything down to 21.5 inches is what the main case will be. The oak shelf will cut down to 21 inches, and that will accommodate that fitting into the groove of the back panel. And so we'll double check all our dimensions and make sure we're good to go, and we'll get started on that.
This frame was too wide to run through the table saw, so I'm using my homemade track saw to cut that down to size. The track saw is one of those things that I wonder if I would use it a little more. I don't feel like I have a need for it very often, but it is one of those tools that maybe I would have more of a use for it if I had one. We'll use the table saw to trim these all to the right width as well, now that we can fit those through the table saw. And now we'll go ahead and run the grooves for the back panel. And we're using our 1/4 inch dado stack for that.
Okay, so we've cut our parts and pieces all to their final size now. We've got everything fit together. I did one more dry fit together. We've got the top and the bottom frame in just to kind of hold the sides together. And then also we put in this back frame. And I've gone ahead and I've marked for biscuits. I've decided I'll use some biscuits when we glue this up. So we'll go ahead and get those biscuit slots cut, and I think we'll be ready to assemble this cabinet. Okay, so I don't often share my glue ups with you guys too often because mostly I think it's kind of boring. But this one's pretty involved and we're going to do it in several steps. And so I thought I'd go ahead and share that with you. What I've got right now is my side and my top frame are just clamped together. I don't have clamps that are long enough to span the whole distance. And so we're going to use our top and our bottom frame to clamp the sides together. My main goal right now is to get our bottom shelf glued into just this side side dado here. We're just going to do the one side, and you'll see why here as we go through the process. Because we got to be able to put this together in just the right way, or we'll not be able to get everything in how we want it. So that's my goal right now, and we'll make it happen. I'll make sure we get plenty of glue down in this dado as well. I also put some glue on the end of that shelf, and that's to kind of just let that glue soak into the end grain there where that's end grain. And that way we just make sure we have plenty of glue to hold these together. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and clamp the top to the top frame on this side. We can bring our bottom frame in here, and that will act as our clamp on this end. And the other thing I want to make sure I made happen is I've got the groove for the back panel. We want to make sure that's lined up so that when we go to put that back panel in, we don't have any concerns there. And now that we've got that glued, we're going to set our back panel in on top. And I've got some clamps on the front, on the top frame there to just kind of hold the panel up. And all this is for is to square the cabinet up. We'll go ahead and check our diagonals just to double check that. And that's about 71 9/16, and because I've done this several times now, I know that's right where we want to be. So that's stage one. We'll go ahead and let that dry, and we'll go from there. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get our back frame glued on. We're going to glue it to this side and our shelf.
And again, I'm just making sure that I'm getting plenty of glue on all of the surfaces on both sides of the joint. We want to make sure that we have plenty of glue to hold this case together. And I do like to go ahead and spread it out with the brush and stuff. It kind of just makes sure we get it evenly spread through the joint as well. At this point we can move through the steps a little quicker. And so I'm going to go ahead and glue the bottom frame on. I've got biscuits along the joint between the back frame and the bottom frame. Then on the ends of that bottom frame I have screws that will go in through that end panel as well to help strengthen and hold that joint together. Now it's time to get the back panel set in the groove.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and glue our top frame on. As I did with the bottom frame, I've got the glue on it already.
Now I can go ahead and put on the end panel. And there's a lot of joints here, and so I've got to move pretty quickly in getting that glue on there and spread throughout the joints. It took a little bit of effort here to get everything lined up and stuff, but all in all it went pretty good.
Okay, so I'm back in the shop this morning. I've been away from this project for about a week and a half. My son got married last weekend, and so we were doing that and having a good time there. Always a happy occasion. And so now we're back on this today. I was going to go ahead and work on the face frame, but I had a visit from my client that I'm building this for, and they wanted to make a little bit of a change. And sometimes that happens. This is not a big deal. And I really work hard to try and just build exactly what my customers want. And so when those things come up, you know, we talk about maybe if there's issues or things like that. But you know, I do my best to make just exactly what they want. And so sometimes, you know, as things change, as they decide what they want, we just kind of do what we got to do and move forward. Like I said, this one was not a big deal at all. We were going to do an adjustable shelf in the case here, and instead of that, we're just going to do a fixed shelf. So, like I said, not a big deal, but instead of working on the face frame, I'm going to go ahead and take care of that first, and then we'll get back on the face frame after that, I think. So we'll go ahead and get started on that.
Here the case is upside down, and I have the shelf resting on some supports where it will be located.
I've also gone ahead and made a couple of trim pieces. This was the cutoff from the shelf. And so as you can see, the grain is running this way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rip this in half, and that's going to become our shelf support. I've got the case upside down right now. And so after we cut that in half, that'll be our shelf support on the bottom of the shelf. And I ran the grain that way because that'll eliminate any kind of a cross grain situation. So we'll be able to get a nice strong glue joint all along that. I've also made a piece that will go along the back of the shelf, and then I'm also working on a piece of molding for the front part of the shelf that will be about an inch and an eighth thick, inch and a quarter, and that'll just kind of help add a little bit of strength to that front part of the shelf as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get this ripped down. I've sanded it and all that, and then we'll go ahead and start fitting that to the case.
Couple of quick passes through the table saw. We'll rip out those two pieces for the side, and then we'll trim up this piece for the back. The back corner is going to be mitered on those shelf supports. Do that at the miter box. And then this front edge just receives just a clip to kind of match up the way that trim shapes out. And I went ahead and drilled some pocket holes for some attachment points along the shelf into the side of the case as well. And then more biscuits along the front of the shelf. And there it is, not fully attached yet, but that's how it's going to sit into the case. And at this point we can turn our attention back to the face frame. Cut out those pieces. I like to attach my face frames with pocket holes. They work really well for this, and you never see them. I like to clamp it down to the table like that. It keeps the joint from slipping around on me as I try to screw that together. I know that can be a problem with pocket holes. Things like to move just a little bit, and that eliminates that problem.
Okay, so just a couple of things that I want to point out. I've got the face frame still clamped onto the case, and of course this is the side, and so I've made that face frame to overhang just about a 32nd of an inch, as you can see there. So when I cut these biscuits, I'm going to adjust the biscuit joiner when I cut the face frame slot to accommodate for that. And then also this bottom shelf will have a 1/4 inch. Now it's got a little bit of a bow to it, which will be flattened out with the biscuits, but it's got a 1/4 inch drop. So the same thing, when I do the face frame here, I'm going to adjust and compensate for that. I'll move the biscuit joiner and cut those slots 1/4 inch lower.
I like to do a dry fit with all of the biscuits in place. I run into instances before where in the glue up I've had a biscuit that was not where it was supposed to be and caused me some problems, so I always like to double check those before I actually glue it up. And that does make the glue up go a little smoother. Again, plenty of glue on all the surfaces. And you have to move quick when there's this much to do. And the clamps will hold all that frame on there while the glue sets. Now I'll deal with the overhang with a flush trim bit. At this point I'm going to begin working on the feet for the case, and so I've glued a couple of boards together, and I'll just mill that up and cut it to size. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark out for our feet here, and I'm going to make some wraparound feet on the front corners, and so we're going to go ahead and mark those front corners to make sure that that grain wraps around properly. Then we can cut those to length. Between using the table saw and the bandsaw, I can cut the shape of those feet out. And then I can use the spindle sander to smooth those up and sand out the saw marks. Now I need to cut a rabbet out of the back part of those feet, and that will be to attach to a frame that we'll use to assemble these feet onto the case. And I can do that just with a couple of passes through the table saw. And now we'll cut the miters on the front feet to bring those two pieces together. I always like to use a stop block just to make sure all my pieces are identical. We'll go ahead and cut those feet to their final length. Here's something I like to do anytime I can with miter joints, is to use a biscuit. That helps in clamping up to hold the joint together and adds a little bit of strength as well. And after a test fit, plenty of glue on both sides, and we'll put that together.
Okay, so we've got our feet made. We've got the front ones, the front corner feet all glued together and everything. And so they're still pretty rough. We've got some final sanding and some shaping a little bit to do. We're going to round some corners and just touch those up, make them look really nice. But right now I'm getting ready to build the structure to attach it to the bottom of the case. And so we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to make a little plywood brace here for the back leg. We want to give that some strength side to side, make sure that's really strong. I really like to overbuild my bases because I imagine, you know, this is a heavy case, and at some point in its life it might be dragged across the carpet or something. And so I want to make sure that those feet can withstand that, and that they're really strong, so that in 150 years it's still being dragged across the carpet and can withstand that. And so we're going to do that, and then we'll build a frame. It'll be a pretty simple frame. We won't need any center braces or anything like that. Just a frame that'll go from the outside of the case all the way around from the front to the back, and then side to side. And then we're going to notch that frame around these feet, and that'll give us a place to put some pocket screws, and so we can screw those feet to that frame as well as some glue. And then eventually that'll all get glued and screwed to the bottom of the case, and so you'll have all kinds of glue and stuff in there, and that'll make a really strong base. The reason for bringing the frame clear out to the side is we're going to have some more trim work that will go between the feet, and that will give us a nice mounting surface to do that. And so we'll be able to make our trim work and build right off of that bottom frame as well. So that's what we're going to do. Let's get into it.
I built that frame just a little bit oversized to the case again. We're going to go ahead and screw it to the bottom of the case. And then we can flush trim that just to make sure it fits our case perfectly. I'll go ahead and cut those notches out of the corner using the bandsaw. And now we'll drill some pocket holes to attach those feet. One last step with the feet before we attach those is to round over all the corners and give those a softer look. And I'm going to go ahead and round over the corners on the case as well. As I mentioned before, plenty of glue, plenty of screws, and we'll attach those feet and that frame to the bottom of the case.
Okay, so I finished up last night making our piece of molding here with the router table. And then this morning I began making just some flat stock. I've milled this down to 3/8 of an inch thick. And right now it's just square. We're going to go ahead and cut that to size. And then we're going to make our piece of molding that will be similar to this. And our plan is we're going to put a backer piece underneath this piece of trim here. And then this will go on top of that. And that will make our base molding. And then I also milled up enough of this to do the top when we get to that as well, because it will have some similar features there. Be a little bit different up there, but with that, we'll go ahead and get started on finishing up our base.
I want to make sure these pieces fit nice and tight between those feet, and so I'll sneak up on that cut with the saw just to make sure I get a nice tight fit. Now we're on to our other piece of trim. We'll go ahead and bevel a piece of stock, and we'll do that on both edges. I do that on both edges because this will be 2 pieces of trim. It's easier to work with a wider piece. So I've gone ahead and ripped those to the proper width. And now we'll go ahead and start cutting our notches with our table saw. And with the profile of that shape, it's kind of a 3-step process. Just make sure I put each of those faces down on the table saw so that we cut all 3 steps of that notch. And I'm using the fence here to create the distance that I want those notches to go. And I'll do one side of that piece of trim, and then I'll flip it around to the other side as you see me do there. Now we're back to that first piece of trim, and we'll attach that to the base using some pin nails and some glue. Now make sure those miter joints get plenty of glue on there. And I've attached the other pieces of trim as well. Now it's time to cut our panel for the top to size. I'll just straighten one edge with the panel sled, and then I'll go ahead and cut it to length. And then we can run it through the table saw to cut the proper width. We'll go ahead and soften all of these corners as well, just as we did with the rest of the case. And I'm just using a 1/8 inch round over bit. And I'll do all the edges on the top and bottom of that top. Now I'm drilling holes in that top frame to attach the top to, and I've elongated all of those except for the ones along the front edge. I want all the movement to happen towards the back of the case, and so I elongate those, and that will allow that to do that. And then I've cut and fit our trim pieces. And I've got the case again upside down here. It makes it a little easier to attach those. I like to take a little screwdriver, and as I glue those miter joints up, you can kind of burnish those edges, just the point of that edge together, and that'll seal up and close up that miter joint really tight and make it look really nice. And our last pieces of trim around the top. So here I've applied the stain and polyurethane finish to our case, and I'm attaching the track hardware for our sliding glass and attaching the top for the final time.
Okay, so there it is, our oak display cabinet, all finished up, ready to go to its home, complete with sliding glass doors. And those were a little bit of a challenge, had me sweating bullets for a while there. Getting the hardware onto the glass was involved a rubber mallet and a lot more hard hitting than I was comfortable with, but we got that on there. No catastrophes. It's all installed and everything went great. If you stuck around this long, hey, thanks for watching. I certainly appreciate that. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear those. If you have any feedback, if you have any questions, I'd love to answer your questions. And appreciate your watching again. And so if you, little teaser here, if you look down in this bottom corner, there's the beginnings of the next project. So thanks again. We'll catch you on our next build. Oh, and one more thing. If you want to stick around for some beauty shots, I got those coming too. Thanks again.